Hi students, this lecture we're going to talk about model binding in ASP.NET Core. Model binding we've already done a little bit with, whether or not you noticed we done it. Anytime we're trying to pass data back to our controller to process, whether we're trying to add something to a database, do some business logic, filter or display, whatever we're trying to do, we need to get that data back to the controller some way. And one way to do that, or the main way to do that, is with model binding in ASP.NET. Uh, there's multiple ways you can do it. The most common way to do it is by having some sort of view model, which we've already talked about a little bit, and passing that view model to your view. And then from there you can bind it and then pass that data back to the controller to do whatever you want to do on the controller side. So another way to do it is with if you're trying to do some CRUD operations on your database, for example. Let's say you want to add a new item to your database. You display a list of items and you want to add an item to your database. Well, what you can do is you can have your model on your view. So have your view using your model, maybe for that type, and then have some text boxes for the type that you need, and then bind those text boxes to the model when it comes back to the view, or back to the controller, I'm sorry. So you can then process it, and then inside of your controller, inside of the post controller action, you should have the model inside it as a parameter. So it'll bind that data back to the model and then accept that model back into your controller as a parameter. So if you go through the book, it does some different things. If you go through the PowerPoint here, it does some different things with the request, the route data. You can get data from the query. So for example, if you want to get, maybe you're trying to pass back page, you can get that from the request object. Those are all things you can do for sure. So if you want to go through and look at that, you can. The example I'm going to go through in Visual Studio right now won't use the request or route data object. So I'm just going to work with a simple model. So let's go ahead and exit out of this PowerPoint presentation. This week I'm going to switch it up a little bit. Since I've been using Visual Studio, I'm going to VS Code. I'm going to go ahead and use Visual Studio for this one. So if we remember back when I did my last video covering my kind of pet project that I'm doing, I believe I have it running locally. Where is it? I think it's right here. So I have this form I have this view that I display all of the products that are in my database, and then this is kind of where I left off when I did my AJAX request to get data back to my controller. So an AJAX request is one way to do it. Again, AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript in XML. So that's one way that we can get data back to our controller, and that's with JSON or a JavaScript object that we send back to our controller. This, however, we're going to do using plain old C#. So what I want to do is I want to add to this list. Maybe there's a new item type that I want to add, so I want to add a button down here to add that item type. And when I add that button, what I'm going to do is have a view that's going to show up to accept the parameters of that model. And when I do that, I'll pass that then model back to the controller and call my database to add that to the database. And then once I'm finished with that, I'll probably redirect to this page or something. That way I can see it in this list. So let's get to it. Let's go ahead. I have Visual Studio open already with my project. I'll go ahead and stop running it. So the first thing I want to do, let's close some of this down a little bit so we can see what we're doing here. So here's where my for each, where I display all of my items. What I'm going to do is under that, I'm going to put that button. So let's go ahead and put a div. Just for display sake, I'll go ahead and put a style, and then maybe margin top put some margin on the top of 10 pixels, say, just to separate my button a little bit from my other content. So this would probably be better putting in some sort of CSS style sheet. I usually like doing it in line at first, and then once I get a good feel for it, then I can create a class and put that class in my CSS style sheet. Here, I'm going to go ahead and create a button, so I'm going to go ahead and create an anchor. My ASP action will be add, so I'm going to try to add an item type here. I'm going to go ahead and put a couple classes. I want it to be a button, and I want it to show up as BTN primary, so it's going to be a blue button. And it's going to say create a new item type. I should be able to save it there. So now I have a button. The action is add, so let's go back to the controller and add that add action. So here is my items controller. This is going to be a simple GET request, so let me go ahead and full screen here. I'm going to go ahead and HTTP GET. It's going to be public. It's going to be an iAction result. It's going to be a view result, but it implements iAction result. I want to say it's called add. And let's go ahead, put a couple of those, and then we can return the view. So then it should look for that add view. Now the next thing I need to do is I'm going to go ahead and say HTTP post, because I'm going to need a post action to get that data back. So I'm going to say public. This is going to be a redirect to action result, because what I'm going to do is redirect back to my basic action up here. That'll get my items from my database and then return that view model. So this can be add. I'm going to say item type. I think that's from entities.item type. So it's going to use that as the type. So that should be fine. And then I'm going to return redirect to action result. Action result. I'm going to say basic, because it should redirect to the basic action. All right, what does it not like here? Okay, there we go. What's this not like? Identifier expected. Let's go ahead and try to build it and see if Visual Studio is just a little confused. I don't think I'm missing anything there. Let's build it. No, it still says identifier expected. What am I missing here? It's not what I want. HTTP post, public, redirect to action result, add. I'm going to save it. Let's try to run it. Oh, I don't have the name. Wow. How long have I been coding? Okay. There we go. So I didn't have the name that I wanted to give it. So I'm going to end up using this to send to my database. I should probably just go ahead and do that now. So let me go ahead and code. So I use the repository pattern. Basically, my repository just orchestrates it orchestrates the difference between my proxy and my database. So if my proxy isn't up, it goes and gets to my database directly. So I'm just going to go ahead and add it to my database. I think my proxy, does that also, I believe that implements a different interface. So I'm going to actually need to add it to my iDiablo2 repository. So let me go ahead and I'm going to say void add, and it's going to add a entities.item type. And it's going to be called item type. I won't make that mistake again. This is already using entities, so it really doesn't need to call out entities, so I'll go ahead and remove that. Since it already has the entities namespace up here at the top. So let's go ahead and I need to go to my then Diablo2 repository and implement that member now. So let's go ahead and control period, implement the interface. So now I should have an add method that throws in not implemented exception. So this adds the item type from here. You can see it comes from the entities project. So let's go ahead and say DB context, that's going to work with my database. And this is going to be an items type, item types. So that's going to work with my item types table. And I'm going to say dot add the item type. And I believe it's actually going to be using the wrong item type. This needs to come from my database entities. I needed to add a different entity to my database because the proxy has a different one, so I need to map it over to a different type. So since I need to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and say new database entities item type, do a new object initializer, and say the name equals the name that was sent back from the view. And then once I do that, then I need to call dbcontext.savechanges. Okay, so now I have an add method there. Now I just need to call it here, so I need to say repo.add item type. And then redirect to my basic action. Now, one cool thing Visual Studio does that VS Code is a little bit lacking in, I don't know if VS Code might have an extension that might solve this problem or not. I don't think so, but I've never really looked. But Visual Studio allows us scaffolding capabilities whenever we have a type that we want to scaffold into our view. So what exactly does that mean? So let's go into our views folder, into the items folder, and from there I believe we need a view called add. So let's go ahead and add a view. It is going to be a razor view. Click here to go online and find more scaffolding extensions. So there's even more scaffolding extensions than I even know about. I'm not going to need to add any more, so I'm just going to click add. Maybe there's a scaffolding extension that I might need in the future, but not at the moment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say create. So I want to create a new type in my code, or in my view. And then what type is it? Well, it's going to be this item type here from my entities, remember, my item type. I don't want to create it as a partial view. I'll go ahead and reference script libraries, sure. Use the layout page, yeah, that's fine. And I'll click add. So what this is going to do is use this item type and scaffold out what it would look like a page to add a new one of those types. So like I said, it is not as easy as in VS Code. You actually have to go and right-click or go and make a new folder, or into your items folder, make a new view, give that view a name, and then actually go through this all yourself, unless there's scaffolding extensions in VS Code, which I wouldn't put it past VS Code to come out with some scaffolding extensions on their own. But I've actually never tried to do this in VS Code. Usually I do this all myself. So you can see it done all of our code essentially for us. So we have this ASP action here. And then we go ahead and we model bind all of these to our model here. So you can see at the top we're using our item type model. And then from there it built out a row, so it shows us it's going to use bootstrap, display, and then we're going to say this labels for our ID property. So this is a control label, and this label down here is then for our name. So if you know how the database is currently configured, I don't actually need this ID. The ID is going to be auto-generated for us. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this div here. Okay, so now I have here, so I have an ASP4 element, so it's going to look at my name property, so it should know the label to put there, and then this is an input for name. So it's going to come this ASP4 and know that this needs to bind this name back to the name on my item type whenever the button is clicked, the submit button is clicked. So you see it created a button here for us. Type is submit, value equals create, and ASP action, I'm going to say basic because my index action doesn't really do anything right now. I could probably change that for the index action, but that gives us a back to list button. So I'll go ahead and use it and say I want to redirect to my basic action. So from there, that should be good. I don't believe that also gives you a span here, so it gives you some validation, which we'll talk about next week, how to validate our models. Make sure your model state is valid before you try to do any data manipulation or add it to a database or anything like that, which we'll actually do in our view model, or it could actually be in our model itself. So let's try to save and run it. And as my website comes up here, I'm going to go back and go to my Solution Explorer. And I don't know if it's going to let me add anything right now. Add. No. So let's go ahead and wait until I test it, and then I'll show what I was going to show. Let's go back to Chrome here. And I want to show basic Diablo 2 items. And this is all of the items that I had prior to. So let's say create new item type. So here's that button that I made at the bottom earlier with a little bit of margin top on it, so it wasn't right below my content. So let's go ahead and click that. And an unhandled exception occurred. The view add was not found. I did call it add, didn't I? I swore I called it add. Maybe I didn't. Nope, I never renamed it. That's awesome. Okay. Let's go ahead and rename it to add. Okay, that should fix that. So let's go ahead and try that again. Nothing can ever work the first time. All right, show basic Diablo 2 items. Let's create a new item type. And now we have our view. So it would have an ID text box, but I went ahead and got rid of that. What type of item do I want to add here? I want to add, I already added all the item types that's in the game, so I'm just going to add like battle axe. That's the first name that popped into my head. So here's the back to list, which will redirect to our items basic, or here's the create, which will add it to my database and then redirect to basic items. So if I click create, I then should see battle axe on the page. So let's go ahead and click create. And like I said, nothing ever works the first time. Again, I forgot to rename this to view, or to no web page was found. Yeah, I think this needs to be ASP action add. And then we can say type, or method, I'm sorry, is post. So let's try this again. It makes things exponentially more difficult if you never change the name of your view. All right, show basic Diablo 2 items, create a new item type. Let's say battle axe and click create. It's still looking for view. Why is it still looking for view? Anything that says view here I want to change. Type equals submit, form group. I don't see anything else on here. This ASP action add. Let's get rid of, what is view? Let's delete this. So here's add. Okay, maybe I changed the wrong one. Let's click add, save. Okay. Let me check everything else before I decide to run it again. Let's go ahead and change this method again. Method is post. It's called add. Sorry, this video is taking a little bit longer than I thought it would. Create a new item type. It's going to be a battle axe. Create. Okay, now we have battle axe down here at the bottom. So I went through in Visual Studio. Let's go ahead and stop it. Let's go ahead and click items and say add view again. And you notice if I click add view, here's the name that I never changed. So make sure you change the name of your view. And you can also create, you can delete, you can have details of multiple items. So I could have a view with all of the details of every single, let's say, item type, or details of, let's say, every single Diablo 2 item. So you can create all of these scaffolding templates for how you'd want to display your information, and you don't have to build it from scratch. So that's really useful. Here's a list, which is similar to details. An edit template, so you can have more text boxes, and pass it a view, or pass it a model, and then it'll auto-populate your model for your edit view. So it has all of these scaffolding templates for you to use, and you don't have to generate all of your code up here. So let's click cancel, since I don't want to add a view. Let's go to my Team Explorer. Okay, I have all of this information. Let's go ahead and try to build it again. It should build since I just ran it, and it does. And I'm going to say I added create and an add view for item type. Let's go ahead and commit all this locally and sync my changes with the server. Let's go ahead and sync. Looks like I have some conflicts. Auto mapper conflicts. Let's see, auto mapper. Okay. Let's go to accept that. Commit. Merge commit. Let's go ahead and sync back again. I probably should have built it first just to make sure. Okay, successfully synced. I probably should have built it to make sure it didn't break. All right, looks like the build succeeded. Okay, so I should then be able to go back to my Git, to my Azure repo. Why can't I find Edge? So let's go to Azure repos. I usually click the Start Free button. I'm not sure if there's an easier way to get to this or not. I should probably actually um, have a shortcut for it. I believe it was my website. Let's go to repos, commits, and you can see here, added a view to my item type, and here's all of the information that I added. So I did a merge of some package references in my project file, and that's about it. So hopefully this explained model binding a little bit for you, scaffolding for you, as well as how to add items to your database context, which we'll also cover a little bit more when we cover Entity Framework more in depth in a couple weeks. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I hope this video helped, and I'll see you guys in future videos. Thanks.